It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 715 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Hey, I have another excellent episode lined up for you today. My guest is David J.P. Fisher. David's a Chicago-based sales expert. He's a keynote speaker and an author. And he's been on Accelerate before, and it's always a pleasure to talk with him. And today we're going to talk about empathy. You know, the term empathy, I think, has become almost a cliche in sales. And every seller thinks they have it, and most, unfortunately, don't. Now, is that due to a misunderstanding of what empathy is, or is it just a plain lack of caring? I mean, it's like checking a box. Sure, I've got empathy, people believe. Well, you want to stay tuned because you're going to learn how to develop your ability to be empathic and develop that deep, trust-based relationships with your buyers. Now, before we get to David, I want to take a quick second to talk about the Sales House, sales performance program for B2B sellers. In the Sales House, you receive everything you didn't get from sales training but really needed, namely tools to master the skills to elevate you from average to excellent, and doing it by winning more of your opportunities. So, I mean, you've been trained how to build a relationship with a prospect, but do you know the 4 core relationship skills that will enable you to build an incredibly effective, trust-based relationship with any buyer? I mean, you've been trained how to do a discovery call, but do you know the 2 most important pieces of information you need to learn from your prospects? I mean, knowing these will make all the difference between winning and losing. I mean, you've been coached how to qualify an opportunity, but do you know the one agreement you absolutely need to reach with your prospect before they can become truly qualified? Well, I mean, if you're not completely satisfied with your ability to win deals, then the Sales House is the resource you need to reach the next level and, quite frankly, the level above that. So members get unlimited access to checklists, playbooks, courses, coaching, mentoring, and an engaged community of other members to help you sell with more confidence, trust, impact, and acumen. So to learn more, join the Sales House. Come to be the best version of you, the best sales version of you for sure. Visit thesaleshouse.com. That is thesaleshouse.com. All right, let's jump into it. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to chat.
Always a pleasure to chat with you. And I think you have a new baby on the horizon, right?
We do, just a couple months down the road. So got to pack in as much as I can right now because I'm going to be a little busy for a while.
Spoken like a first-time father.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
If it wasn't, you wouldn't be having these dreams about freedom and so on, as you would already be in the midst of it.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and I look at my parents. I'm like, how did you do this with 4 of us already running around? So, yeah. Well, we'll start with 1, and then we'll work from there and see how things go.
I have this very distinct memory with the birth of my first child. My ex-wife was staying in the hospital overnight, and with the baby, obviously, and so I had this sort of unplanned night because we had thought maybe she was going to be coming home that same day, but they decided to keep her, and I remember going out, and there was a place I liked. As we lived in Palo Alto at the time, and had these great hamburgers. Get a couple of hamburgers, a couple of beers. I remember just sitting, watching a game or something, and thinking,
last meal.
Well, not last meal. It wasn't. It was just memorable because it was like like one of the last times, in that environment, and really.
Well, we're excited. So.
Yeah, well, you should be. It's always a lot of fun, a lot of stress, a lot of challenge, but always a lot of fun.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we can talk sales now if we want.
I guess. I mean,
we don't have to.
That's what people want to hear about.
People can always switch to a different podcast if they don't like what we're talking about. So we were going to talk about the topic of empathy in sales, because certainly empathy is one of these words that's sort of thrown out, like relationships, value. So it's sort of one of the core buzzwords that really perhaps, like value, like relationships, a lot of sellers really don't understand.
Right. For sure.
And it's not that they don't understand the dictionary definition of it, but really don't understand the context of sales. So let's dig into that, because I know it's something you that's important to you. So
yeah,
in your words, how do you define empathy in a sales context?
It's a great question. So for me, empathy in a sales context is the ability to understand and make sense of someone else's perspective in a conversation, right? So it's something that we do in human interactions all the time. It's our ability to see something from somebody else's point of view. I think we often confuse empathy with sympathy, right? That we have to feel the same thing that people do. But at its very base level, it's just the ability to go, oh, if I was in that person's shoes, I would view my proposal in X, Y, and Z way because of reason A, B, and C. And so the more that we can get into somebody's head and understand things from their perspective, it obviously has a lot of benefits as we are walking them through their buying process. So that's how I would define it.
And okay. Well, I mean, I don't have any disagreement with that. I mean, I think that
Come on, we got to disagree about something here, Andy. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you and I have had a conversation in the past about, there's certain people writing about empathy, like Paul Bloom's written a book, Against Empathy is the title, which talks about the fact that the most commonly used form of empathy, he believes, that we teach people and that we talk about is this ability to feel what other people are feeling, is as opposed to the more dispassionate understanding what they are feeling.
Right.
Which he believes is a much more constructive way to, I think he calls that rational compassion, is more than emotional compassion, which is the first case, is a much, much better approach to take. And I think for sales, this is a really important distinction to make, because we tend to fall into this whole thing talking about pain points and so on. Is we're not there to feel their pain. We're there to understand their pain or the source of the pain.
Absolutely. And I think where you can look at kind of the overlap of that idea of emotional empathy and rational empathy is exactly what you said, the ability to understand why they might be in pain, right? The ability to go, oh, I can see why you might need to get more efficiency from your production line, or I can see why you might want to be saving prices. I understand the emotional need behind that. But to your point, you don't have to actually jump into the pool with them, right? And I think as a buyer, as a seller, in fact, the people that are very successful are the ones who can, you again, kind of get it without having to live it with them, right? And something I know we've talked about in the past is, the seller's ability to guide people through their buying journey, right? To make decisions better, faster, more effectively. You kind of have to have that dispassionate approach to be able to see the forest and not just the trees. And so the more that we can develop that skill on an emotional level, to be able to understand emotions, but then again to go to that next level, which is what I think a lot of sellers don't do, which is go, okay, I get why you're here emotionally, but let's look at how we get past that pain, for example.
Yeah, well, I think there's even a sort of another interim step, because I think that emotions or empathy, sort of become commoditized, right? We've sort of like value and relationships and so on. We sort of toss these words out without really understanding from a practical standpoint what that means. And I see it sort of tied up both with curiosity and with listening.
Oh,
right?
For sure.
And so I wanted to dive into this topic about, okay, sort of established its ability to understand, people's situation, people's condition. I think there's another level to it I want to get to, but really, how do people sort of begin to develop it? Because you and I have talked in the past about a book we both really enjoyed called "Humans Are Underrated" by Jeffrey Colvin.
Jeff Colvin,
right? And I've had Jeff on the show, and one of the points made in that book is he quotes somebody from Oracle, I think, who said, the senior executive from Oracle, saying, empathy is the critical 21st century skill.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm with him.
Well, why do you think that's the case? And I'll tell you why he thinks it is, but I agree with him, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the reason why is if we look at, and even going back to Jeff's book, the idea that in the 20th century, and especially from a sales process point of view, we were trying to get salespeople to be more machine-like, right? Can you make more phone calls? Can you get more people into the pipeline, put them through a very defined and rigorous sales process where you ask certain questions a certain way to get certain discovery?
Now, do you see that 20th century or 21st century? I see that more 21st century. I know it started in the 20th, but I mean,
yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, I would say the second half of the 20th century for sure. Like when you 50s, 60s, 70s into the 80s, that's kind of where I would guess. And I think it really hit its height kind of at the end, right, where you did have, just these very elaborate sales processes. I mean, it started by people like David Sandler, in the middle of the century, and it kind of kept getting more and more. There's 7 steps or 9 steps or 11 steps or 73 steps, whatever.
Sure, right.
But it was just this idea, like, if we as humans can be more like machines, we're going to be successful. And all of a sudden, the machines caught up, right? And that's what we're seeing with a lot of the technology that is coming into the sales process, taking over some of those routine, rote activities. So what makes us human? And Jeff would argue, I think, not to put words in about that, what makes us human on some levels is our empathy and our ability to create that connection between human beings. And so I think that if you can develop that skill, which most of us have intuitively, unless we're sociopaths, but if you can get very intentional about it, it becomes a very powerful tool that you can bring into all kinds of relationships, but definitely into the business and sales ones.
Well, it's interesting your comment about sociopaths isn't having more rigidly defined processes sort of legislating and mechanizing empathy out of the process to some degree.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can say, you can tell people, look, step 3, this is where we're going to turn on the empathy, and really, but as soon as you say this is where we're going to turn on the empathy, is all the empathy disappears.
Right. And you have those conversations with salespeople who are being sold to, where you can tell that that's where they had their training, and they were told by their sales manager, here's where you say the empathetic thing. Right.
And how does that make you feel?
How does that make you feel? Or I was actually I made a video about this, the incessant use of your name in conversations.
Yeah.
Because somebody heard, it's something that came about at some point and has been parroted so many. If I say Andy a bunch of times during our conversation, Andy, you're going to pay a lot more attention to me, Andy. And then when I ask you to buy Andy, you're going to say yes, Andy. Oh, come on. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. No. I find that hugely annoying.
Incredibly. I actually have stopped salespeople and said, stop saying that. It's not working for you. You're about to lose the sale.
Well, yeah, which is almost as bad as people saying, and this is a male thing, is buddy or pal.
Oh, yeah.
And again, people are doing this completely carelessly, but I think under the mistaken assumption that somehow this is part of being more human, as if I have this false familiarity with somebody.
Yeah. And well, that brings up a good point, because going back to this idea of empathy not being about emotion, empathy is not about being best friends with someone, right? And I think that that's something that a lot of people get confused about. They're like, well, if I'm going to develop empathy with you, then we're going to be best friends. And so and conversely, if I'm your best friend, we're going to have empathy. And that's where I think, to your point of going to this emotion, just this emotional level, no, that's not really what empathy is. It is that higher, rationalistic or kind of the meta ability to see what's happening in that prospect's mind or in that customer's mind, and then addressing that effectively to help them move forward.
Yeah, well, I think where people fall short, sellers fall short, and so this is, I think, something to explore a little bit is that they don't ask that follow-on question to really understand what the situation means for the person. There's assumptions made, and they might take the first answer, but they don't take that next step. And again, they're not trying to feel the person's pain. You're trying to understand the situation. And that's really, for me, is the core to empathy, is this understanding. It's not feeling, it's understanding. But to understand, we need to make sure we are fully informed.
100%. To your point about listening being an incredibly important part of empathy, I think it's funny that listening is so critical and it's always talked about, but yet we're so bad at it. And, the average seller, I think, listens to even a conversation like you and I are having. They go, oh, empathy is important, so I'm going to ask questions. And they ask a question, but they don't ask it to actually understand. They ask it so that then they can say, oh, I get it, and then say exactly what they were going to say anyways, right? They're asking questions just to get to their own response. And that's, I think, that mechanistic habit or systems that we kind of had, like, the 7 steps of the sale. So at this point, I'm going to ask this question, but no matter what they say, I'm going to just answer this because that's what's in my sales manual and move from there. Versus the idea of, to your point, going, why are we having this conversation? Why are you even willing to talk to me about the services we provide? Oh, we need more efficiency. Okay, what does that mean to you? What is efficiency defined as? They say that next level, and then even asking them again, okay, how is that impacting your job? How is that impacting what your emotional state is based on your job, right? Well, I'm freaked out because we're getting pressure from the C-suite to cut costs, but I know that if we cut costs in this place, we're going to have a worse customer experience. If you can understand that, again, you don't have to feel it, but you can understand and go, oh, that's where this person's coming from. And navigate it.
Sure.
Right?
And it's okay to empathize then at that point and say, that must be difficult for you. That must be hard. I understand. You don't want to say, oh, yeah, jump into your own story. Yeah, I've been there a million times. That's really going to suck. Watch out week 2,
Right.
But it's just this, again, just be a human being and say, I get it. Yeah, that sounds like that could be challenging.
Yeah. So 2 of the most powerful words in a salesperson's vocabulary, in my opinion, are "I understand." Something I've said my entire career is "I get it." Right. That's just my colloquial way of saying it. But it's like, I get it. If somebody says to you, man, we'd love to move forward with you, we just don't have the budget. I get it. Right. I've been in places where I wanted to get something I couldn't. Now, that doesn't mean I'm just going to say, okay, bye. But if I don't at least acknowledge that, then I'm being disingenuous and we're not going to have a good conversation because I'm not understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah. And it's and for people listening, it's not enough to say, yeah, I get it.
Right. You have to actually feel it.
Yeah.
Right?
And it will come across if you actually feel it. And I like using the word "I understand" because it's like very formal. Hey, I understand. I mean, this must be a challenge for you. And always put it back into the context of them. I understand why it's a challenge for you, and that's fine. And the whole idea about I have to feel your pain, all that. Yeah, let's just keep on the rational, logical side because they're feeling the emotion, and you acknowledge that there is emotion there. You understand, but as we said before, if you get too bound up on the emotional side, then it starts clouding your judgment as well.
Oh, for sure. And if you think about what our job is in this scenario, I talk about in my books the idea of being a sales Sherpa, right? Being a guide. It's like your job isn't to get caught up in it. They do want out. You don't want your doctor to walk into the room and you got a broken leg and have a broken leg. You want them to be, I get why that hurts, right? I've been doing this a long time. Let me tell you how we're going to fix this so that you don't have to have that pain anymore. I want the dispassionate, rational.
Yeah, you don't want the doctor crying while he's setting your leg.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, this must really hurt you.
But right, that's what I think happens a lot in the sales world because it is sometimes hard to find the right balance. And so sometimes salespeople they go, well, if I'm not supposed to be completely dispassionate and closed off, they go too far the other way, right? And they do kind of almost get that weepy, oh man, I've got to get these guys a discount because things are so tough for them right now and they're in so much pain and I got to help. That doesn't necessarily help either, right? So It's always about finding that middle ground.
Yeah. Well, that is hard for sellers, especially if they're not receiving the type of coaching and mentoring they need to sort of help them see what's appropriate for the situation.
Yeah, for sure. That's why they're here listening to us, and that's why they're in the sales house getting that coaching and training that they need.
There you go. Thanks for the plug. I'll pay you later.
Wow. That sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just look at my questions here because, gosh, we've made so much progress through it.
Nice.
Well, I think what sort of the logical next step for empathy, though, is this whole idea of trust. Then is I think that the buyer, your buyer, needs to feel a certain level of sincerity and authenticity and empathy from you in order to take that next step to trust, because empathy precedes trust. And maybe even before we get to trust, we sort of skimmed over the listening part, because to me, empathy really stems from listening.
Oh,
right. We talk about it as sort of this human sales skill, and people want to think, well, it's intuitive, blah, 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 which it really isn't to most people, I think. And I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about all this lack of empathy that sellers have a hard time, and the human connection, not being curious about other people, and why are we still dealing with all these issues in sales? And he was wondering why I thought that we were still dealing with these things after 130 years of modern American selling.
Right.
My answer was bad parenting.
I'll buy that. Well, bad parenting and bad schooling, right? Because if you put in through, at least the American education system over the last 130 years is sit down, shut up, sit in your desk, don't talk, right? Just listen to the teacher, do your test. There are many ways, after you get past like kindergarten, you don't have as much chance to practice those skills, right? Except for the playground and the lunchroom. That's it.
Yeah. In sales, first and foremost, you just want people who can be human beings, good people. And if you hire people, and I interviewed a guy on my show, Tony Chan, who had written a book called Good People, Venture Capitalist out of Boston, a great book, just saying, look, the first thing I focus on, and we have our portfolio companies focus on, is less than the qualifications is, are they just good people? Yeah.
I often coach business owners when they're hiring salespeople. I'm like, the first thing you're looking for is emotional stability, right? Same way of saying, is this a good person? I can teach them how to close. I can teach them how to do a sales presentation. I can teach them about the product or service. But if they're coming to you with some dysfunction, or they just haven't had as much chance to practice being a good person, I mean, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. Yeah,
it is hard. Yeah, not to digress too much, and
right.
But I think it's something for people who are perhaps in sales, looking for new jobs, or aspiring to get in sales first time, or sales managers hiring is. Yeah, if the personal life is messy and dysfunctional, as you talked about, it is hard to be good at sales. It's hard to, doesn't mean you can't become, but I can even look at my own life where, a period is going through a separation in my marriage where, you can't completely divorce yourself from those things.
Who you are at home is who you are at the office, right? To a certain degree.
Yeah, that's.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to actually, that you were asking about how you develop the listening skills, or shouldn't these just be intuitive? I think that for most of us, these are intuitive skills, but a lot of times we don't think that we can bring them into the office or into the workspace, or they aren't, to our point about bad parenting, bad schooling, that they aren't cultivated throughout our lives. And so we kind of start to push them down. I think for a lot of salespeople, it's not about learning these skills as it's almost like remembering them, or just being intentional about it. If you're, almost kind of think about how you interact with a significant other, a good friend. We often have these intuitive, empathetic skills. It's just a matter of being a little more deliberate when we go into the office, of a prospect, for example, and going, okay, I can bring that in. I'm going to be a little more aware because this is a workspace. I'm not just hanging out with my wife on the couch at the end of the week, talking about our weeks. But it's not, again, about learning these skills as much as kind of bringing them into a new context and being intentional and deliberate with how you use them. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but how are we training people to do that?
Right. So, I mean, a couple of places that I suggest most people to start is the idea of listening itself is making it a habit. And just like anything you're bringing to a sales presentation or a sales conversation, it just requires some deep intent right in the beginning, right? Is asking the next question. So to your point, a lot of times we ask that first question and then we just keep moving on. It's almost forcing yourself to do that. Say, hey, every time a customer for the next week answers a question, I'm going to ask one more question. Mm-hmm. And because it's a new habit to establish. And it can be as simple as that. Writing down on your notepad, if you're, an outside sales, you're talking person, just have written down, really big, ask one more question.
And what is that question?
It depends a little bit on context, but it could be as simple as, how does that affect you? Right. Mm-hmm. What is one thing I like to ask, and you said assumption, what does that mean to you? What does X mean to you? So they said, again, we need more efficiency. I don't know if we're going to have budget for this. We've got these pressures. Okay. Gotcha. I totally understand. What do those pressures look like? Right. What effect does that have? Whatever it is, it's just letting them continue to go down the path of their thinking mm-hmm. and kind of scratching the surface a little bit. Because one, you're going to get a lot of great information, but two, and not to dive into the trust part, but man, there's so few opportunities for us to share what our challenges are. And so when you as a human being, in this case, in the sales capacity, go, hey, tell me about what's really, irking you right now. And what's, tell me about your perspective and what you're thinking. People will open up and tell you things and trust you a lot more. You've created more of that human connection mm-hmm. as well. So, I mean, that's one place I'd really suggest. The other thing that I think is really valuable, and this is especially for sales leadership, in debriefs, and hopefully you're debriefing salespeople after their conversations, maybe you're not, but asking them, especially with no sales, this was always powerful for me. Why didn't you get the sale? In
a loss or a no decision?
Either, both. Like anytime you did not get the sale, say what, no decision, why? No sale, why? And as a sales leader, and you can do this to yourself if you're self-managing yourself, whatever that first answer is, ask why again. Because that first answer is usually, oh, they didn't have the budget. Well, why not? Right? And it requires a little bit of digging down, but it helps us as salespeople understand, I'm not really understanding the motivations of my prospects and clients. And if you can continue to harp on that, then the salesperson goes, hey, I know my manager is going to ask me about the why, so I might as well ask this question. So I have something to tell them. Mm-hmm. And then boom, all of a sudden they're having this conversation. They're like, oh, wow, I can actually respond effectively to that.
Yeah, well, you're, as a new parent or soon to be a new parent in about 2 years, you'll be really tired of that question. But I think it's a good question. And I think there's two variations. I mean, for me, I like the why questions in the debrief mode. Yeah, hopefully you would not get a salesperson at the time of decision saying they don't have the budget because should have found that out well before that. Yeah. And the sales manager should have asked that question well before. But I think a great follow-up question is along the lines of, and to the point of getting people to talk, is something along the lines of, well, that's very interesting. What else can you tell me about that?
Perfect.
Right? It's sort of general, and you can ask that. Again, if you're in a conversation, you don't want to ask that 6 times in a row in one conversation, but use it somewhat selectively. You can ask it a couple times in a row as another variation. Oh, that's mm-hmm. very interesting. Tell me more. But it has to be delivered, to your point, with intention. Has to be authentic. It's not just rote. You got to be listening, because otherwise you are like the 2-year-olds going, why? And you'll experience that soon enough with their following around the house. They're asking why, and they are not listening to the answer at all. They're waiting for your voice to stop so they can say why.
But kids are great salespeople, so we can also learn from you. They're very
intuitively.
Persistent.
They're oftentimes very good, very persistent. Yep.
Right. Yep. It's. I think it's the idea of, if you want to increase empathy, increase listening. When you increase the open-ended questions, it actually forces you to listen, right? Because you don't know what their response is going to be. And in some ways, I think that's actually where then our value comes in on a human level, is being able to respond to whatever they're going to say, right? Because if I know exactly what you're going to say, well, you don't need a person. You can have a website do that, right? You can have an AI and a chatbot do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we talk about the value of empathy, even, in the 21st century in a business context. Part of it too is just the human capacity to take in whatever they say and do something useful with it, right?
Well, I think that's really critical, right? Is that rather than selling being a process where it's always the same every time, is you really should look at the other way, which is we have a process, but it's different each and every time I do it. And therefore, am I alive to the differences and able to take advantage of those?
Yeah, I was talked about the difference between the old sale process. I thought was very linear. So I came up in sales in a very transactional model. I sold Cutco cutlery in people's kitchens, right?
Yeah.
It was very transactional. You say this, do this, cut this, chop this up, cut this penny, ask this question.
I love my Cutco scissors, cutting pennies in half.
It's awesome. And it's an awesome product. And it really works in that transactional model. I call what we're in now is more of a sales matrix, where yes, there is still a process, but it's not necessarily linear, right? And there's a lot of connections in between, step A and step D, and it might come back, and then we add more information. We added another, hopefully we got all the information up front. Sometimes we don't. Now there's another decision maker that came in. So you have to have an overall structure, but you have to have the flexibility within kind of like each of those modules or each of those nodes to keep moving things forward. And humans are very good at that. Yeah.
Well, and I think this is sort of the critical point, is with empathy and listening, actually listening, not just, taking it in, but listening and interpreting, is these are things that do differentiate humans from the increasing power of machines and will for the foreseeable future. But it's really your responsibility as a seller to cultivate these skills. If there's one thing that as a seller you should really be focusing on, not there's only ever just one thing, but but listening really becomes top of the game, because empathy flows from listening. The best follow-up questions and discovery come from listening, not from the questions you ask necessarily, but from listening to the answers. And then saying, okay, what's the best question to ask based on what the response I got?
Right. No, I'm listening.
Yeah. Just waiting for that follow-up question. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, really interesting. So LinkedIn put out their 2018 emerging jobs report in December of 2018, and of the top 10 biggest jobs that are coming out, this is based on, of course, all their data, 6 of the 10 were sales jobs. And of the top 10 skill gaps, or skills where they see the biggest gaps, of the top 10, I think it was 6 or 7 of them were what we would call people skills, soft skills. Number 1 was communication, right? So
yeah, well, and I think it was the same report, though. I think it was the LinkedIn report that said that in surveying people entering the job force, and also I think people within 5 years of having started in the workforce, is they thought the hard skills are more important than the soft skills to their future success. And so here they're self-identifying as the fact that soft skills are their greatest deficiency, yet it's this blind faith somehow that technology is going to solve their deficiencies, which it's not. Nope. This is where we live in a world full of humans, and while technology is fantastic, it addresses certain things. In this particular endeavor, human to human, soft skills, empathy, listening, being human, asking great questions, being a source of value are still paramount.
Right. And it's unfortunately, it's hard to quantify a lot of these, which is what makes it very challenging for people and organizations, I think, sometimes to put the time and effort into cultivating them, right? It's hard to judge your empathy and go, you know what, I have a 7% increase in empathy because of my training last year. But yet we don't even have to go as far. We can look at our own lives and go, hey, there's people that I like and there's people I don't like. There's friends I have, there's friends I enjoy spending time with, friends maybe I don't spend as much time with, their family I don't want to spend as much time with. When you really get down to it, more than anything, it's often these people skills are the reason why we choose to spend time with people in our personal lives. So it's going to have an effect on our professional lives as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and it is already. So to the point Colvin talks about in his book is those people who are going to succeed in the 21st century are those first and foremost that master the art of becoming what his quote is, more intensely human. And I think this is really a great way to sort of summarize what we've been talking about and finish up here today is this is the watchword is yes, you need to master the technologies as we all use them in sales, but your success, your ultimate success, to ability to achieve your career goals, to get from where you are today to where you want to be, to win more deals, it's going to be based on your ability to become more human, not less.
Amen, brother. Don't have anything to add to it. That's perfect.
All right. It's my show. I get the last word.
Yeah.
Not always, though. But all right. Well, David, fantastic as always to talk with you. So tell folks how they can get in touch with you.
Easiest place is right online, davidjpfisher.com. I do a lot of writing. If you dig Andy stuff, you might like mine because he writes a lot of stuff that I go, gosh darn it. Well, it makes my life easy because I don't have to write that article. I'm like, Andy wrote it. He wrote it better than I could have done it. So fantastic. But yeah, find me there on Twitter, dfishrockstar, or LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IamDfish.
Dfish. Yeah, we didn't even get a chance to get into the whole Dfish nickname, but we have in the past. We have in the past, so we don't have to this time. All right. Sure. David, as always, and if I don't talk to you before July, which I'm sure I will, but just in case I don't, congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon. Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to thank my guest, David J.P. Fisher, D-Fish. Thank you. Join me again next week as my guest will be Brendan Kane. Brendan's a growth strategist, keynote speaker, and author of a book titled 1 Million Followers, How He Built a Massive Social Following in 30 Days. So, any guesses what Brendan and I will be talking about? That's right. Good work. We'll be talking about why and how you should be building a massive social following, and you'll enjoy this conversation. So be sure to join us then. Before you go, I do have a favor to ask. If you enjoy this podcast, if you listen to it regularly, then everyone here who works on the show would really appreciate if you take a moment, rate and review Accelerate on iTunes. It's really been a while since we asked folks, and appreciate if you could take a second and do that. So thanks again for joining me. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.